I'll talk for about 45, 50 minutes, just to keep it short. If anybody has any questions at any point, please just please just jump in straight away rather than wait until the end. And I'm Irish, which means I talk quite fast. So if you can't understand what I'm saying, just say, "Hey Jenny, please slow down." I'll try to. So when Christos was the person who first talked to me about coming and giving a talk here, and when he said, "Oh, it's this conference about the visual dimension and sound," I was thinking, I don't think I've written a single piece that doesn't have a very, very prominent visual dimension, and it felt like saying, let's talk about music. It felt like a very broad topic for me because I counted up, I went and I counted up all the works that I'd made that had film involved, and there was over 30 works that I'd made. And I was thinking, hey, that's something that I do a lot, but I also really like to have performers move, to do physical things, to use objects which have a visual, a visual prominence on the stage and things like that. But so to try and whittle it down, I thought I would talk about two different projects today. But what I wanted to start talking about was probably what most people think about the visual dimension of music being when they think about music. And the photographs, the first few photographs I'm going to show you are from the Darmstadt archive. So last year Darmstadt was 70 years old, very exciting. And my friend David Helbig, who co-teaches the composer-performer workshop at Darmstadt with me, they asked him to go through the photo archive and pick out interesting photographs. And he said to me, you need to see some of these photographs. There are so many photographs of men looking at scores. and sort of what's amazing is that people are fighting to look at the score. I mean, I love that this is just here. But it's just people are really wanting to look at the scores, because that's really deeply meaningful. He's my favorite person. So, and you see these, and I was really happy because it was like, oh wow! But it was photograph after photograph after photograph of people looking at scores, fighting to look at scores, leaning across people, even weirdly linking the arms of the two persons closer to the score. I told that was Phil Niblock, and I emailed him, and he said, I never would have worn that shirt. So I don't know who that is. But it really struck me how for composers, the score is this fetish object. It's so important. It's where we think that the real meaning of the piece is that somehow in the score is the real meaning. You don't see pictures of actors doing workshops where they're all reading the script. You know, like they don't think that the true meaning of Waiting for Godot resides in the actual script. They think it resides in all the apparatus around that, and the director's book, and all these different things. So I thought that this was very interesting because I think within new music we do fetishize it. It is this very, very important thing. We talk about composers in terms of how beautiful their scores are. We'll often say, have you seen their scores? They're beautiful, as if that is somehow a different quality than the actual music that the scores emanate from. So it's that to me is very, very interesting. And this sort of I mean, my sort of approach to notation has always been to make it as practical and precise and transparent as possible. I'm a massive Edward Tufte fan, so that, I mean, they would be like Edward Tufte's Envisioning Information, the visualization of information. They would be books that I'm showing to my students much more than I might be showing orchestration or instrumentation books, because I'm trying to say to them, if you want to have this system where, you know, the singer has only 20% tone to 80% air in the sound and their tongue is in this position, I want it to be precisely consistent across all your scores. I want it to be as good as a German timetable, where you understand that instead of saying 11:21, 11:31, 11:41, 11:51, it says 11, 21, 31, 41, 51, so it's easy for you to find what time bus you need to get at. So that's something I push very, very, very much in my practice, but I'm always interested by the way that people sort of become obsessed with scores, and I think that we have this becomes very muddy and complicated when we talk about graphic scores. Because scores like this, like Cardews Treatise, scores like Cage's Fontana Mix, these are scores which sort of take on a different life. They take on a different visual meaning than regular scores. I remember being in hipster apartment party in Chicago. This is back when Friendster was a viable social network before Facebook, and I had a friend on Friendster who had a party and invited all his friends because he said, what's the point if I don't get to meet these people in real life? And it was an architecture student who had framed pages from Treatise in their apartment because they thought they were really cool from a design point. He wasn't trying to think about it as a musical score, he just thought it was a really, really beautiful design object. Fontana Mix by Cage. I remember going to a Sonic Youth concert about 99, 2000, and they were selling tour t-shirts with Fontana Mix on the front and the list of dates that Sonic Youth were playing on the back, but there was no credit. And I felt like such a, I know when you say you feel like the king of the nerds, that's really like saying you're the Omega nerd rather than the Alpha nerd, because I was going, I know what that is, it's Fontana Mix by Cage, and because I found it amazing that they had gotten away without being sued, by putting this on their t-shirts. Who knows, maybe they asked the foundation. Hard to know. This sort of fetishization, though, of graphic scores and this interest in them extends. My sort of favorite weird examples of this are people who got performance 33 seconds tattooed on their arm. There's two pictures of two different people on the internet who've had this tattoo. Both of them, interestingly enough, got John Cage's handwriting to copy it, whereas like a lot of the versions of the score, it's typewritten. So John Cage's handwriting is very important to musicians. We want to see writing that's like that. We recognize it straight away. I know somebody devised a font based on John Cage's handwriting, so you can type it in John Cage's handwriting. Rather strange. I've also seen at the same website, and the reason I ended up, this is, I think one of the examples from the augmented reality was Brian Eno's music for airports. It sounded like that. And this is some of the score. And the reason I came across this, I love it that it's clearly new because he shaved, and then it's sort of the stubble's growing back in into his Brian Eno tattoo. But I was looking for the score of Brian Eno's music for airports, and that's how I found it. Because I googled Brian Eno's music for airports, and up came various people's illegal photographs, and then I thought, oh wow, what the hell is this? So this is what I'm interested in, because when I look at this, what I see is a bizarre code. And I sort of want it to be like the Voynich manuscript, and I want it to be a document that people have spent hundreds of years trying to decode. I don't want it to be easy to figure out how this sounds. This is where sort of the non-completely practical side of my brain comes into playing with regards to notation, because I think that starts to open up new worlds and new ways of thinking about sound. The example that I'll use for this is Linear B. Linear B is an ancient Greek script. It dates from about 1450 BC, so it's something that's incredibly old. Tablets of this were discovered in the 1890s by a British person, of course, stealing your country's things. I won't put that into the transcript at all. But fragments of it were discovered in the 1890s, and nobody could figure out what it was for a very, very long time. It wasn't fully decoded until the 50s. Okay, so it took over 60 years for people to figure out what this was. For a long time they thought it was a different language. There was generations of people, generations of coders, different people in different parts of the world who worked on decoding this, and then finally they were able to figure out these were basically grocery lists. That these were lists of items. But they were able to figure out a language's syntax, verbs, vocabulary from nothing. It's mind-blowing that they did this. I also think about the movie Arrival, which I highly recommend if many of you don't have any weekend plans and want to recover after the conference. This is a really fantastic film that just came out a few months, I can't remember, it wasn't a few months, maybe a few months ago, or I can't remember whether it was before or after Christmas, doesn't matter. In it, we have a linguist. It's like a film where a linguist is a hero, is a main protagonist, and she's trying to figure out how these aliens communicate. And the whole concept of the movie is that the way that they communicate completely restructures the way that your brain thinks about time. So the idea that languages can be something that's so powerful it completely rewires your brain so that you can see into the past, present, future simultaneously. So that's sort of what I'm looking for out of notation, is that I want something that I feel I have to put the amount of work in, that it takes to decipher linear B, and then it might have this sort of mind-altering effect. And that's where I start to do what I call world building, which leads me towards using film, because it starts with using notation a bit more playfully. So the scores that I've made, and a lot of these I make under alter egos, I make them under different names. Some of them are experiments, and that's why I started making things under different names, because I like to have these sort of fronts, if you could say, like shell companies, where I do my different experiments, artistic shell companies. So a lot of these scores work in very different ways. They're very visual. When I started working this way, I had to learn a lot of different new software. A lot of stuff even was done by hand. So these are scores that it rotates, like a cooking wheel, and they're sort of recipes. Also very much to do with language. I'm very, very interested in language. So weird, sort of non-standard English terms that form an entire system for making these cooking things which don't involve food, they just involve sound. I'll just fly through some of these because I have lots of different examples. Other scores that I made look like this, where they're drawings, very, very delicate drawings. They're sets and sets of these sheets. They're all framed. Also scores, that's almost as large as the score is in real life. This is a score for a vocal piece. In the Marshall Islands in the South Pacific, the islanders, because mostly they're rowing in the ocean rather than on land, they need to make maps about where they are in the ocean, and so they make what are called stick maps. And so the stick maps indicate currents in the ocean, and they have stones that indicates where the islands are. And I thought this was perhaps one of the best mapping practices I'd ever heard of, because to me that's a completely appropriate way to map sound. Is that there's energy flows, there's vectors, there's obstacles, there's things that you come up against. So I started making these scores, which are large structures that you have to hang from the ceiling, that are based on this Marshallese Islander practice. I also made scores which were embossed tin so that you feel them with your fingertips, sort of like a different form of braille. I made scores which were large. That's basically the size the score would be, with lots of visual elements, text elements, sort of drawing on sort of Dadaist tradition, but giving it a new twist. Scores which are quite elaborate drawings. This is a score that was commissioned by the World Wildlife Federation. So there's lots of chemical information in there about Prozac, because everybody in Manhattan is taking so much Prozac that they're peeing fluoxetine into the water system, and so the fish, this is real, the fish in the rivers around Manhattan are getting really ill because they're taking all these antidepressants, swimming around in secondhand New Yorkers' pee. So sort of, I thought that this was both tragic and completely bizarre. So sort of I did these series of scores that all to do with marine biology that have solfege built into them and cell structures and things like this. I also made scores with movable parts that have different layers, so there's like about 4 or 5 different layers of paper in the score. There's threads which move so the performers can blow on and play the contours depending on where the threads fall. Also 3-dimensional scores that come in sets, that come in little boxes that are sort of portable with objects inside them. So for me, when I'm making these scores, a lot of the time I don't even care if they never get performed, because I view them as a sort of a form of speculative composition. I really love Stanislav Lem, and I really love he writes all of these book reviews of books that didn't exist. And the idea is that you absorb the concept of the book from reading the book review. I think that it's really important that we have speculative scores. I think it's important that we have speculative musicology. We have, in Ireland, a couple of the young guys, of the young musicologists, are doing this sort of, and I feel I should say this given that I'm in Vienna, Thomas Bernhardt influenced speculative musicology, where and in fact the Thomas Bernhardt tone maps very precisely onto like an Irish drunk person ranting. It's like the same mode, sort of like just anger at the world. So they're sort of doing it in this quite. They keep saying so-called in all of these articles. So there's articles that Irish musicologists are producing where it's an article about the music of Greece, but it's done in the form of a short story with like 2 drunk guys at a party, where one's trying to explain about you have to go listen to Greece, it's the best thing ever. So sort of, and there's lots of fiction within that. As somebody who's worked with alter egos and who's created a huge amount of work under different names, it resonates with me very, very well. I also think it's a very important practice. when I was growing up in Ireland, you would read about music in a book, but you might not get to hear it for a very, very long time. So, you know, when you're a kid and you're reading about Dada, and you just think, like, this blows your mind, but you don't get to hear somebody performing Dada sound poetry for a long time. Or you read about New York in the 60s, and you think, wow, like the theatre of eternal music, but you don't get to hear that music for years and years and years because it's pre-internet. But that imagining that you have of what it sounds like, and what it would have been like, is extremely important and extremely powerful. And in some ways, it's often more powerful than the music you actually heard when you finally got access to it. A theatre friend of mine in Ireland, we were talking about this, and he said that he grew up completely obsessed with Einstein on the Beach. And when he went to see it for the first time, he thought it was really garish because of the colours, because he thought it was in black and white, because he'd only ever seen photographs in a book that were in black and white. So sort of, you know, he was thinking, like, I built my entire ontology as a theatre director around thinking it was all in black and white, and now I see it, it's really kitschy, you know, so it's sort of, I think that those moments are really important and they're really powerful. And so that's what I mean when I say speculative musicology, is I want to spend the same amount of time thinking about this and what it could sound like and the systems that it could produce, rather than, you know, not to throw shade, as RuPaul would say, but like most musicians would look at this and think, okay, that's a nice chord. You know, and that's another chord, and that's a chord. They don't play this melody. You know, whereas I want to think, okay, no, we have to sort of start by reverse engineering bonsai trees so they're even smaller. Then we extract the code for that, you know, and start to build this sine tone structure, you know, sine tone generated from that. So this is sort of what I mean when I say like sort of speculative musicology, or sort of speculative composition. We all have cookbooks that we read and we think, wow, my life would be really great if I made, you know, this salad with edible flowers. And I took a photograph of it on a marble counter, you know, but and that sort of means something to read those cookbooks, even though we know we'll never make those recipes. So I think we should allow that to be part of our makeup of our sort of our thought experiment repertoire as composers. So this idea of world building, it comes, the most sort of extreme example of this in my work is this project called Ashtop. Now this is just a screen grab of the website. If you want, you can go there, it's ashtop.org. Ashtop is an Irish word. It sort of means like strange, queer, wondrous. So if you speak to an Irish fluent speaker and you say, oh, on Rud Ashtop is like, it's a bit weird. But in a nice way, So this is a project that I did. It launched at the beginning of 2015. I had a lot of different collaborators. When you go to the website, it sort of functions like Ubu Web. So you go and you think, oh, this is a good educational resource, because it's got all this information about historical Irish avant-garde music, including, you know, the Kilbride and Malone duo, Sister Anselm, and Porrick and Gyola. It also has information, I feel I should say this, about the Kilkenny Engageists, which were the Irish version of the Viennese Actionists. They did a lot of stuff with communion wafers and holy water and stuff like that, very blasphemous and obscene. But Ashtop is a project that I made. It's completely fictional. So it's a fictional history of Irish avant-garde music starting in the mid-19th century and ending in 1985. And it ends in 1985 because that's when the Contemporary Music Centre of Ireland opened, and I felt like I needed to have like sort of passing on the torch. I really wanted these people to exist. That's what I should say first of all, is that this is not about making people feel silly that they didn't know that, you know, Sister Anselm isn't real. This is about calling into being this parallel universe, which I deeply believe exists in quantum physics terms. Calling into being this parallel universe and just taking for granted that it does exist. Everybody that was involved in this, I never had to give anybody a brief. I just said, you know, starting in the 19th century, ends in 1985, and we ended up with this whole bunch of people full of complete out there avant-garde musical figures, loads of women, drag queens doing sound poetry nights, people getting awards from Germany, that was like a thing, and then Jean-Michel Jarre stole their educational recorder music and used it as the theme for Oxygen. So we ended up with all these sort of echoes of real life, except for the Jean-Michel Jarre bit. We were also able to draw on a lot of weird real history. So it involved huge amounts of research because I thought, okay, well, I have to make sure that, there was no Irish data, which I was fairly sure of. And, so I have to troll through all the archives, see, there's no Irish data, there's no Irish futurism, there's certainly no Irish Viennese actionism. There's no Irish improvising nuns, things like this. Or maybe they are in a locked, like a sealed convent somewhere, and we just don't know yet. Because we claim that Sister Anselm was discovered by a German feminist musicologist. So the reason we have recordings of her music is because Vede made them. So sort of this whole world involved huge amounts of research. There were Irish composers at the time, but they were sort of middle-class composers who often were shipped off to England to write orchestral pieces called A Day at the Galway Races and things like that. And that wasn't so much my vibe, I wasn't really into that. So I just sort of thought, I want to write these people who I wish existed. So part of this website is a very serious thought experiment. It's very playful, but it's very, very serious.
Excuse me?
Yes?
What does the 19th of January mean?
Oh, it means it's when he posted it. It's when the web design posted it. So, sorry, there's no occult meaning. But I will point out that this is real. People always think that this newspaper headline is Photoshop, but this is real. Black magic fear in 2 border towns. Because the British Army did a psychological operations campaign, a PSYOPs campaign, in 1972 to 1974, where they wanted to convince people that all the terrorists were Satanists, that they were all doing black magic, so therefore don't get involved in terrorism, kids, because they're all Satanists. So they planted over 70 stories in newspapers, both sides of the border, completely fictional. They even staged like a black mass with like a dead sheep and sort of like a magic circle and things like this, because people were going to see The Exorcist, because this is when The Exorcist and The Devil's Ride Out came out, and people would go to see the movie and they'd be like completely scared witless, and then they'd read in the newspaper that and they didn't care. It was terrorists both sides of the religious divide. They would read the IRA were to Satanism now, they're like, oh no, can't get involved with the IRA. So when we found this, and this was completely real, it made sense that Niall Kilbride and Karen Malone, our drum and saxophone noise duo, whose music was a bit too much for the people of Ireland, that their music would have been left playing at one of the black magic sites because it sounded like somebody was possessed playing the saxophone, and then they just went off to New York and they sort of were doing noise before John Zorn did noise. So sort of that's how we positioned them. But this sort of world building is really important because these documents, the ephemera, the pictures, they formed the scores for the music that we made. So we had things like completely fictional, I photoshopped this. This is a passenger manifest from a ship that sailed to New York in 1921, the SS Caribbean. This is a real ship. I downloaded this from the Ellis Island Immigration Centre's website. My relatives, a whole bunch of them went over to America around that time, so I knew about it. I photoshopped my 2 people in there so that they could then give birth to Pádraig MacGill O'Wira, who would invent minimalism before anybody in America did it. With his, again, I photoshopped this. This is Durdon, which is one of the Irish words for drone. There's loads of Irish words for drone, it's amazing. So Pádraig MacGill O'Wira is positioned as this guy who's back in Ireland because his father died in New York and the family moved back to Cork, which is what happened with my great-grandparents. They moved back to Ireland and he's making this pipe music but with no tunes. This is the time that the Irish Folklore Commission were travelling around Ireland. That's how John Cage ended up travelling around and getting recordings for Oratorio. That's a real historical fact. And so I claim that they made these recordings of Pádraig and these other musicians doing this Durdon session, but there were no tunes, so it was considered like a bit weird and sort of useless. And it just sort of, the tapes, in the great tradition, sat around the archives gathering dust until an intrepid musicologist dusted them off and realised that this was drum music from 1953, and therefore minimalism and drum music was born in Ireland before Lamont Young and the Theatre of Tone Music got to this. So this is for me was very important. When I made this project, I was actually living in New York, and Tony Conrad was a very close friend of mine, and we were talking about this whole thing to do with the Dream Syndicate, the Theatre of Tone Music, whatever you want to call it, and the fact that Lamont Young was sitting on these tapes and will not release them unless he wanted Tony and John Hill to sign a document saying they were his compositions rather than group improvisations. And I said to Tony, what if, we just pretend it was invented in Ireland? And he's like, go for it. And so sort of, these sort of projects, they were huge. It has research in it, it has contemporary music, history in it, it has Photoshop skills, it has illegally used logos of RTE and the Irish Folklore Commission, and I don't know what that's for. So sort of all of this goes into forming the score. And that for me is because I want to imagine this music that's like strangely weird, weirder than I could imagine, and try to call it into being. So this is how what I call world building happens, is that it's all of these surrounding artifacts. Other people are the Irish Dadaists who likes to write sound poetry in a mixture of English and Irish. This is the Irish alphabet, so I can read that it says Sass and Sassennacht. But anybody who doesn't speak the Irish alphabet cannot understand it. The Irish alphabet, the Irish language has extremely complex pronunciation rules. I don't know if any of you have ever gone on holiday to Ireland. Most people are horrified when they sort of see the Irish language written out. So my Irish Dadaists are slightly different than the other Dadaists because they were working class. Because when I looked at the history from this period, I would find more conservative art, apart from Joyce and Beckett and Flann O'Brien, which of course are the godfathers of a project like this. But when I looked at music, most of it was coming from middle class, upper class families who were rich enough to send the kids off to England to get a proper education out of Ireland. And so I felt like the glut of the Ashland artists are working class. Also, I had to do a lot of labour law research because the place that you could work, the place in Europe, the company that had the best labour laws in the 20s was Guinness, the brewery. So they had to work at Guinness because that ostensibly gave them some time to work on their data projects. But in addition to that, they weren't peaceful Dadaists. They were against the World War, but they were engaged in the struggle against the British. So that's why they never really fitted in with the Viennese and Berlin and New York Dadaists, because they weren't true pacifists. And they wanted to use the Irish language and the Irish language rules of pronunciation because that would make it more difficult for non-Irish people to perform their sound poetry. There's also people this is Rosie Monitor, who's like a sort of a calligrapher and a radio nut. So these are sort of appendixes of her objects and sort of her collection of different imageries and knotwork and radio waves, and she made these very sort of elaborate drawings. So there's all of this ephemera associated with it. If you go to the website, everything is up there. It's all available. There's like over 2 hours of music. There's thousands and thousands of rows of different articles. There's a book that the contents of the book are on the website, but it's like a print-on-demand book because that's how we budgeted for the book, is we print on demand. But all of these different personae, the one that's probably closest to my heart of the whole thing, and we speak about him in my family in Ireland as if he's a real person. And people say things like, I think Queeving would like that. Is an outsider artist that's a persona that I developed called, his name is Queeving Branagh, which translates as Kevin Walshe from Irish into English. So when I'm in Ireland, if I say to people, oh, I'm doing an exhibition of Queeving Branagh's works, they go, oh, so he's a relative. And I say, oh yeah, he was my great uncle. He was an outsider artist and he lived alone, and when he died, I bought his cottage and it was full of bin bags of all his stuff. And he was obsessed with cassette tapes, which is really interesting because I'm a composer, you see, so it's like a good thing. Because he would make all these subliminal cassettes which he would bury, or he would wrap crystals around them, and he thought that they could heal and that they could alter your consciousness. He made these elaborate diaries in Ogham, which is an Irish script, where he details different radio frequencies he exposed his subliminal tapes to, pitches that he recorded on them. In this entry, he talks about glorgoyle, which is an Irish word for stomach rumbling noises. He had stomach issues, so he slept with the tape bound around his tummy and hope that would clear up some of his stomach problems. He also made instruments. I said that ogham is a form of Irish skirt from the Middle Ages. There's different forms of ogham and they're all called scales. There's over 100 different forms. And some of them were thought to be occult scales and they were used for occult purposes. So this is one of these occult ogham scales which Queen Wien burnt into one of his sort of jacked up violins. It's all broken and sounds all distorted. He also used ogham in the sort of the same way that John Cage used the I Ching, in that he had this sort of Ouija board system where he would set up these ritual spaces with lots of Irish sort of folk pagan occult things like rose hips and lavender jaws for the little shark, and then he would do this sort of Ouija board session where he would, that was how he did his chance procedures to work on his different cassette tapes and how long they should be buried for and what should be recorded on and things like that. So the reason Queen Wien's important to me is because he's this Irish outsider artist that I wish existed, because we don't really have outsider art in Ireland. I spend my life going to second-hand shops when I'm back in Ireland, hoping like I'm going to get this cassette tape and it's like unmarked and I bring it home and it's going to be like the Irish Wesley Willis, or you know what I mean, or like the Irish. You know what I mean, some Irish weird version of outsider music, but instead I get a lot of religious meditation cassettes, and instead that seems to be what Irish people don't want and don't go to second-hand shops. And they're not without their charms to hear like an old man saying things like, meditate on Jesus' face, and things like this. But I'm still in search of the outsider Irish outsider artists, so I had to make them up. So I have two different alter egos that are both outsider artists. One is Violetta and one is Queen Wien. So as a result of this project, this Ashtok project, which got coverage and got press in places I never would have predicted. It went straight outside of the new music world into lots of different weird nooks and crannies. And to this day, I get emails from people, oh, the men all love Sister Anselm. They all want more Sister Anselm's music to exist, and I get these people who write to me as if she's real, and they say like, oh, I'm in this French record shop, and like, do you have any more Sister Anselm for us to sell? And I'm like, sorry, dude. But I ended up doing lots of weird different projects that came out of Ashtok, because what I realized was that it was a world that everybody inhabited. It wasn't my private little world that people couldn't get access to, but there was something about it because it was historical, something about it because it was I directed and I ran the whole thing, but there was collaborators who lived all over the world. They weren't all necessarily Irish who were involved in it, that people felt it was a world they could step into, in the same way that people on the internet write slasher fiction about Captain Kirk having an affair with Spock or something like that. So people felt that they could get invested in it. And the Cork Film Festival approached me and they said, we want you to make a film, because I work a huge deal with film. And they said, we want you to make a film. And we don't care what it is, but we want it to be related to Ashtok in some way. Something to do with Ashtok, because they do very interesting weird musical, or they did, the guy left, but they were doing very weird, interesting musical programming at that time. And so I shot this film, which is called Uncleft, and I'll just show you a clip of it now, and then I think we'll have to stop shortly after that. But I shot this movie called Uncleft, and it's a half an hour long film. I'll only show about 5 minutes of it. It's sort of like because for me, Queen Wien Brannock is sort of like an asexual Kenneth Anger that's living in the wilds of Roscommon in Ireland. And I've done all these exhibitions where I've displayed his artifacts, and I've set up tents where people had to take this questionnaire, and then I diagnose them according to Queen Wien's system, and then they listen to one of his subliminal tapes to heal themselves, and they go to a pod and inhale smells and hold a picture in their hand, things like this. So I've done these sort of different, presented Queen Wien's work in lots of different contexts, often in vitrines, as if it's just like a regular sort of legit museum exhibition. And then these sort of performative installations, and I've made these different recordings that I claim are Queen Wien's subliminal cassettes and things like that. But with this, it allowed me to go somewhere further. I've always imagined him as this person who is sort of the archetypal guy who just is living on the farm, and the neighbours keep an eye on him to make sure he's not dead, which is what happens, because I have a house in the middle of nowhere in Ireland, and it's very nice. People will follow people home in the dark to make sure they get home okay on their bicycle. Like, we have a guy who's about 80 who cycles his bike home, and there's like 15 minutes drive to the nearest street lights, and he cycles in the dark, and sometimes we follow him home to make sure he's okay. But it's sort of, he's let be, but nobody's too invasive. And they know he's pottering on projects, but nobody's really sure what it is. Colin McAuliffe, the guy who commissioned the film, called it surrealism, because it's sort of like rural, surreal. He invented, that's his word, he invented it. But it allowed me to go deeper with the way that I make films, because this is a still from the film. This is a straw boy. You'll only see this very, very briefly in the clip that I can show you, but I wanted just to talk about. This is a straw boy. This belongs to Joe McGowan, who like is a guy who lives in Mullaghmore, like right on the edge of Ireland, like overlooking the Atlantic Ocean. And straw boys were commonly used. It was like an Irish folk practice. They were made out of straw, and you had this sort of bandolier, and you had these two cuffs you put on your feet, and you couldn't see the person's face through it. And traditionally, this is what I think is hilarious, the single men would wear them at crash weddings. So everybody's having this wedding reception, and then these guys just come in like the Blair Witch Project and dance with all the single girls. The straw boy tradition is really interesting. It's difficult to make them. You have to wait till the right time of year. You have to have the right time of straw. But in a very sort of Irish way, when I was trying to find some, I just Googled them, and then I found Joe McGowan's Sligo Heritage website. And when I phoned him up, he said, "Oh yeah, I'll lend them to you. I'll leave them in a bag on the porch because I'm going out for a drive." And I just turned up at his house, and there was a bin bag with these fantastic things in it. So the film sort of tells this occult magical ritual story. That's the arc of the film. It has this energetic movement between a cave that is underground, underneath a tree, that is supposed to be like a portal, a hellmouth, that's linked to a cave 40 miles away, which is up on top of a hill. And the cave that's under the ground is associated with a boar, and the one on the top of the hill is associated with the star. So you have this sort of male-female yin-yang thing going down under, and then emerging 40 miles later. And that it's a hellmouth, so every now and then like devils and beasts come out and roam around killing the cattle and stuff like this. So for me it was a way of sort of engaging with Irish folk practices, but in a strange way, and sort of making them my own. So I just thought I would show you just the first 5 minutes of the film, which gives you I suppose I view this film as an emergent artwork, because it's the product of all this world building. And I think that when composers start making films, we don't start making films in the way that film students start making films. We don't write scripts or treatments. I think the only composer I know who thinks in those terms is Olga Neufeld, who really thinks, like narrative screenplays, and that's great. But for me, I have to find my way into film, and that was through, the score is this natural extension and expansion until it becomes this world, and the film has to be made to be part of that world. Which means I'm thinking about structuring the films in a different way than a filmmaker would. And I'm not thinking in terms of the script, the way that a regular filmmaker would. I should say that I've always had friends who are filmmakers. I've always worked on films, I've done music for films. There's different filmmakers that I've worked on over the years, from when I was a student right up until there's an Irish no-way filmmaker called Vivian Dick, and just last week I did the music for her new movie. So I've always been around filmmakers, and I've particularly been around filmmakers when I lived in New York. As I said, I was friends with Tony Conrad, who was like, any excuse to put on a weird costume and just put that camera there, and start filming. And so this really super practical, almost John Waters, fast, dirty, loose approach to filmmaking, that was very important to me, because there is this barrier for entry. It's easier now because, we had mini DV, that made things very, very different, and now we've got this. It's just astounding. I have entire pieces that I decided I'd film it all on the iPhone just as a concept, and people think it's been shot on a camera, like on a good camera. But I think that conceptually my way towards film was through this, is that I didn't decide I'm going to make this film about this guy Queenie Brannock. I built the world, and then the film had to emerge, I thought, logically, from that world. So I'll just show you the first 5 minutes of this. This was this is a film that was designed that it would exist in 2 different versions. One is with a fixed soundtrack, and the other one is that the soundtrack changes and is performed live with different musicians. So we've done it with a lot of different people. We do it in Norway next week. Did it at Anthology Film Archives in New York with Okioni and David Grubbs. It's been done all over the world, not just in Ireland. But the version that you're going to hear, in the section that you'll hear, it's myself and Tony. Oh, and I should warn you, there's some blood and guts, so if you're squeamish, I apologise and issue a trigger warning to go away. Yes, Alice. is structured in different chapters, and I just want to show you one more clip. It's only 1 minute, 12 seconds long. The idea that we came up with for Cork Film Festival was that Queevy Branagh had been commissioned in the 80s to make this film, and he put in the treatment for the film, and then the Archbishop of Cloyne had said it was obscene, so the commission never went through. So the idea was that I, as his great niece, the inheritor of his legacy, the idea was that I was taking his treatment and I was shooting the treatment in the present day, but that also I was inserting some of his subliminal video cassettes from the 80s into the structure of the film. So you have this overarching beautiful 16:9 shot of black magic, nicely well done, nicely graded footage, and then you have this 4:3 horrible VHS stuff, and that these are his subliminal things, and that it's structured in this way, so you have this contrast. So I'll just show you just this cell, and that's the last thing I'll show you from the film, but it's just to give you an idea of these contrasts. Because I think that this sort of way of structuring things comes from thinking about things like a composer rather than a filmmaker, that you make these very abrupt structural shifts. And I should say that the music is supposed to be Queevy Branagh's music, like his take of music, rather than stuff we were composing.
Wearing loose, comfortable, warm clothing. Lie down flat on your back and relax. Your arms by your side, just slightly apart from your body. Your feet 12 to 15 inches apart. And check that your body is lying in a straight line. Slowly turn your toes up towards your body, drawing your heels away from your body. Stretch and relax.
So that's 6 o'clock on the nail. So